The millionaire abandoned his wife. 5 years later, she returned with quadruplets. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The rain battered the windows of the luxurious Crystal Hall, while Hannah nervously adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder. Her hands trembled as she touched the smooth surface of the main door, observing her distorted reflection in the tempered glass. The navy blue dress, once elegant, now seemed out of place on her body, just as she herself felt out of place in that environment she once called a second home. 20 minutes had passed since Richard, her partner of 5 years, asked her to wait there. "I just need to resolve some contract details with Marcus. I'll be right back," were his last words, accompanied by that smile she had learned to love. But there was something different about that smile. Something her gut recognized even before her mind could process it. The hall was practically empty at that hour. Only a few employees circulated, casting furtive glances in her direction. Hannah took a deep breath, trying to calm the nausea rising in her throat. It wasn't just the nervousness of her newly discovered pregnancy. It was a growing intuition that something was terribly wrong. Her hands found the crumpled envelope at the bottom of her purse, where she kept the first ultrasound. She had planned to show it to Richard that night after the meeting. She had imagined his reaction 1,000 times, the smile spreading, his eyes shining with the news. Now the paper seemed to weigh a ton. A thunderclap split the sky, making the crystal structures vibrate. Hannah checked her phone for the 10th time. No messages, no missed calls. The clock showed almost 2 hours since they had arrived there. The lights in the office upstairs remained on, but the silence was deafening. That's when Martha, Richard's secretary, approached with hesitant steps. Her normally friendly face was tense, avoiding direct eye contact. "Hannah, they asked me to give this to you." In her hands, a brown folder and an envelope. Hannah felt her stomach sink. Inside the envelope, a bus ticket to the suburbs and a check with a considerable amount. In the folder, documents that she recognized as being from the apartment she shared with Richard, all transferred exclusively to her name. There was no note, no explanation, just cold papers that screamed a clear message: it was over. "Mr. Marcus asked that you..." Martha hesitated, her voice faltering. "That you leave the office keys and don't come back." The words fell like stones in the silence of the hall. Hannah felt the world spin, her legs weakening under the weight of the reality that was unfolding. The rain continued to fall outside, stronger now, as if the sky was crying the tears she still couldn't shed. For a moment, she was paralyzed. The documents trembling in her hands, the ultrasound forgotten at the bottom of her purse, like a promise that would never be fulfilled. Her eyes rose to the windows of the upstairs office. For an instant, she was certain she saw a familiar silhouette watching. Was it Richard or Marcus, the partner who always seemed uncomfortable with her presence in the company? The figure disappeared before she could be sure. With shaky legs, Hannah walked to the nearest bathroom. She needed a moment, just a moment, to process what was happening. The reflection in the mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, pale, trembling, with eyes wide with disbelief. Her hand instinctively rested on her still flat belly, where a life was beginning to form, a life that would change everything, even if not in the way she had imagined. She returned to the main hall with firmer steps, even as her world was crumbling. She took the keys from her purse and placed them on the reception desk, along with her badge. The weight of those objects seemed to carry all the dreams and promises of the last 5 years. The rain had decreased when she finally pushed through the glass doors. The humid night air greeted her like a slap, awakening her to her new reality. There, standing on the sidewalk with an improvised suitcase and documents that redefined her life, Hannah felt something grow inside her beyond despair. It was a strange sensation, almost violent in its intensity. It wasn't just pain or anger. It was the first flicker of a strength she didn't yet know she possessed. The night dragged on as Hannah walked aimlessly through the wet streets of the city. The weight of the improvised suitcase was beginning to hurt her shoulder, but it was the weight of the decisions she needed to make that truly oppressed her. The apartment was in her name now, but the idea of returning to that space full of memories was too suffocating. That's when a discreet sign caught her attention. St. Clair Community Center, Shelter. The old building with its peeling walls contrasted drastically with the crystal hall she had left behind. Something about that simplicity attracted her, as if an invisible force guided her steps to the worn wooden door. A gray-haired lady with deeply kind eyes answered after a few hesitant knocks. Mrs. Clara, as she introduced herself, didn't ask questions when she saw Hannah soaked on her doorstep. She simply made space and said, "The tea is hot, my child, come in." The interior of the community center was simple but welcoming. On the walls, posters announced vocational courses and support groups. In one corner, a small improvised library housed books from different areas. Hannah observed everything with teary eyes, feeling strangely safe for the first time that night. "Here we offer more than just a roof," explained Mrs. Clara, serving a steaming cup of chamomile tea. "We offer opportunities to start over." Her eyes briefly rested on Hannah's hand, which was unconsciously caressing her belly. A knowing smile appeared on her lips. Gradually, other women began to appear in the communal kitchen. Each carried her own story of overcoming. Mary, who now taught basic computer skills at the center. Anne, who had transformed her talent for sewing into a small clothing business. Their presences and gentle smiles were like a balm for Hannah's wounded heart. "What field are you trained in?" asked Mrs. Clara while organizing some papers on her simple desk. Hannah hesitated before answering. "Biology. I was doing a master's in biotechnology, but..." Her voice failed, remembering the interrupted projects. "The university laboratory always needs assistance for the night shift," commented Mrs. Clara, as if casually, "and we have an agreement with them to refer people. The salary isn't much, but it allows you to continue studying during the day." The proposal lit a small flame of hope in Hannah. It was an opportunity to stay connected to the academic world, even if modestly. More than that, it was a chance to not completely lose the dream she had cultivated for so long. That first night at the community center, lying on a simple but clean bed, Hannah finally allowed herself to cry. They weren't just tears of sadness or despair. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, and of a nascent determination. Her hands found the crumpled ultrasound again, and for the first time since she left the crystal hall, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. The following weeks brought a routine different from anything Hannah had ever known. During the day, she assisted with activities at the community center, learning from each of the women who lived there. At night, she worked in the university laboratory, cleaning glassware and organizing samples, always attentive to the research happening around her. It was during one of these night shifts that the first surprise of the pregnancy revealed itself. What seemed to be a common pregnancy transformed into news that would completely change her plans. It wasn't just one baby, but 4 little lives growing inside her. The news of the quadruplets fell like a bomb on her still fragile new reality. Mrs. Clara, upon hearing the news, showed no concern or pity. Instead, her face lit up with a serene smile. "The more love, the better," she said simply, before beginning to reorganize the rooms of the center to accommodate what she called a multiplied gift. The months that followed transformed the St. Clair Community Center into a veritable headquarters of preparations. The news of the quadruplets mobilized not just the residents, but the entire local community. Mary, the computer teacher, organized an online campaign to collect diapers. Anne, with her sewing skills, began transforming scraps into small onesies and blankets. Hannah's belly grew impressively, attracting attention wherever she went. During her nights at the laboratory, the researchers, who had barely noticed her presence before, began to show interest in her unique case. Dr. Sanders, head of the biotechnology department, even offered to monitor her pregnancy as a special case study. "Quadruplet pregnancies are extremely rare," explained the doctor, adjusting his glasses while examining another ultrasound. "And in your case, each baby seems to be developing with very distinct characteristics." Hannah listened attentively as he pointed out the different positions and behaviors of each fetus. It was during one of these consultations that the personalities began to reveal themselves. The first baby, always quiet and observant, barely moved during the exams. The second never stopped for a minute, as if wanting to explore every inch of available space. The third showed unique reactions to sounds and stimuli, demonstrating a special sensitivity. And the fourth, curiously, always seemed positioned protectively in relation to his siblings. Mrs. Clara, with her serene wisdom, smiled every time Hannah shared these observations. Each star shines in its own way, she would say, while helping organize the small room that would house the babies. The important thing is to give space for each light to shine. The nights in the laboratory became more challenging as the pregnancy advanced, but Hannah refused to stop. While cleaning the benches and organizing the equipment, she took advantage of the opportunity to study the scientific articles left by the researchers. Her mind, eager for knowledge, absorbed each new piece of information about biotechnology and preventive health. It was during one of these nights that she had her first great inspiration. Observing how researchers developed tests for early diagnosis of diseases, Hannah began to think about how to make these technologies accessible to underprivileged communities. In her worn notebook, she began to sketch ideas for a project that she didn't yet know would change much more than her own life. The delivery was approaching, and with it grew not only the expectation, but also the logistical challenges. How would she care for 4 babies alone? How would she balance motherhood with work and studies? The concerns kept Hannah awake many nights, but each quadruple kick in her belly was a reminder that she wasn't really alone. The women of the community center organized into a rotation system to help with caring for the babies. Each gives what they can, explained Anne, while sewing another set of tiny clothes. I'll take care of them while you're in the laboratory. Mary helps during the mornings, and so we'll take turns. On a particularly emotional afternoon, when the weight of the situation seemed greater than her strength, Hannah found Mrs. Clara in the garden of the community center. The lady was watering her medicinal plants, an activity she performed with almost religious dedication. "You know, my child," Mrs. Clara began without taking her eyes off a small sprout that had just been born, "sometimes life gives us more than we think we can carry. But it's precisely in those moments that we discover our true strength." Her words touched deep in Hannah's heart, who caressed her belly while watching the sunset. The babies moved, as if responding to the moment of reflection. Each movement, each kick was a reminder that her story hadn't ended on that rainy night in the Crystal Hall. It was just beginning. The last month of pregnancy transformed the community center into a veritable anthill of activity. Volunteers appeared daily bringing donations, offering help, sharing experiences. Hannah, who had always considered herself alone in the world, discovered herself at the center of a solidarity network that strengthened each day. On her last night, at the laboratory before maternity leave, Hannah carefully organized her notes and ideas. The project that had begun as a nebulous dream now took shape in pages and pages of studies and research. As she closed her notebook, she made a silent promise to the 4 little beings she carried. They would not only be her strength to move forward, but her inspiration to create something greater than her own pains. The birth of the Quadruplets transformed the St. Clair Community Center into a small organized chaos. Michael, the silent observer, arrived first, with attentive eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the world around him. Luke, the restless explorer, came next, already squirming and looking for space. Gabriel, the sensitive one, was born with a serene expression that enchanted the entire medical team. Finally came Ryan, as if wanting to ensure all his brothers were safe before his own arrival. The first months were a succession of sleepless nights, endless bottles and diapers that seemed to multiply magically. Hannah discovered that each baby had its own rhythm, its own way of communicating, its own challenges. Michael rarely cried, but when something bothered him, his expressive eyes spoke volumes. Luke needed constant vigilance, his early curiosity leading him to try to reach everything around him. Gabriel showed a unique sensitivity to sounds and textures, requiring special care to calm down. Ryan, even so small, already showed a protective instinct, calming down only when he could see or feel the presence of his brothers. During the day, the rotation system of the women from the community center worked like a well-adjusted gear. Anne transformed a corner of the living room into a small sewing area, where she produced custom-made clothes for the babies while watching over them. Mary adjusted her computer class schedules to be able to help at the most critical moments. Other volunteers appeared regularly, bringing not just practical help, but also the emotional support that Hannah needed so much. At night, when everyone was asleep, Hannah dedicated her few hours of solitude to studying. With the babies accommodated in their cribs, she pored over scientific articles and laboratory notes. Her initial project to make preventive exams more accessible was beginning to take more concrete form. The experiences at the community center had shown that the need went beyond technology. It was necessary to understand the real needs of vulnerable communities. It was during one of these study nights that Hannah had her first great discovery. Analyzing data on preventive health in underprivileged communities, she noticed a pattern that no one had observed before. The solution wasn't in creating new expensive tests, but in adapting existing technologies more efficiently and accessibly. With the support of Dr. Sanders, who continued to follow her work even from a distance, Hannah began to develop an innovative protocol. Her method combined advanced biotechnology with community practices, creating a bridge between scientific knowledge and the real needs of the population. The months transformed into a year, and the quadruplets began to develop their personalities in an even more distinctive way. Michael, always observant, was the first to form complete words, although he used them sparingly. Luke crawled before the others, exploring every corner of the community center with impressive determination. Gabriel developed a special connection with music, instantly calming down when he heard the songs that Mrs. Clara sang. Ryan, in turn, began to demonstrate a unique ability to perceive when one of his brothers was restless or uncomfortable. Hannah divided her time between caring for her children and developing her project. During the day, she observed how the women of the community center organized to care for one another, how they shared knowledge and resources. This community dynamic began to influence her research, shaping her vision about how preventive health could work in vulnerable contexts. On a particularly busy morning, while trying to organize 4 small coats for a cold day, Hannah received an unexpected call. It was a representative from an important scientific journal. Her article on preventive health in vulnerable communities had caught the attention of the academic community. "Your work presents a unique perspective," explained the editor. "The combination of scientific rigor with practical experience in real contexts is exactly what we were looking for." The news was received with celebration at the St. Clair Community Center. Mrs. Clara, with tears in her eyes, hugged Hannah while the quadruplets played around, oblivious to the importance of the moment. "See," whispered the lady, "sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true path." Academic recognition opened doors that Hannah had never imagined possible. Her accessible biotechnology project began to take shape beyond the pages of her worn notebook. With the support of a university incubator, she managed to transform her ideas into a startup focused on preventive health for vulnerable communities. The quadruplets, now 3 years old, had become unofficial mascots of the project. Luke, with his infinite curiosity, always wanted to play with the equipment in the improvised laboratory. Michael observed everything with his attentive eyes, asking surprisingly insightful questions for his age. Gabriel, sensitive to others' emotions, had a special gift for calming people who came for examinations. Ryan, maintaining his protective nature, made sure none of his brothers got hurt during visits to their mother's workspace. Prevent Life, as Hannah named her company, grew in an organic and sustainable way. The differential wasn't just in the technology developed, but in the humanized approach. Each solution was designed considering the real needs and limitations of the communities served. The business model included training local health agents, creating a care network that went beyond preventive exams. Mrs. Clara, who accompanied everything with maternal pride, used to say, "You aren't just building a company, you're building bridges." And it was true. Hannah's work began to attract attention not only from the scientific community, but also from social organizations and investors interested in social impact. It was during a presentation about her project that Hannah met Beatrice, a journalist specializing in social innovation. Something about the scientist entrepreneur and her 4 children captured the reporter's attention. "There's something bigger here," said Beatrice after the interview. Her story of overcoming that needs to be told. The profile written by Beatrice for a nationally circulated magazine was the trigger for a series of events that would again change the course of Hannah's life. The article didn't just focus on professional success, but on the personal journey, from the night at the Crystal Hall to the building of a social biotechnology empire. The children also fascinated those who knew the story. Each of the quadruplets had developed unique talents that perfectly complemented their mother's work. Michael, with his capacity for observation, frequently pointed out details that other adults didn't notice. Luke transformed his restless energy into creativity, suggesting unusual solutions for everyday problems. Gabriel, with his heightened sensitivity, inspired an entire line of research on less invasive approaches for preventive exams. Ryan continued to be the emotional pillar of the family, keeping everyone united in moments of greater pressure. The St. Clair Community Center also transformed with Hannah's success. The space that before served only as shelter now housed a training center for community health agents. Anne, who began by sewing small clothes for the babies, now coordinated a cooperative of seamstresses who produced uniforms and specialized materials for Prevent Life. Mary expanded her computer classes, including modules on health technology. On a particularly busy afternoon, while Hannah finalized the preparations for an international lecture, Luke, the most curious of the quadruplets, made an accidental discovery. Playing in his mother's improvised office, he found an old box with documents that had been stored for years. Among the papers, a series of recordings on flash drives and contracts with marks of alterations caught his attention. "Mom," he called, holding one of the devices, "what are these numbers here?" Hannah, busy with her presentations, didn't give much importance at the moment. Little did she know that her most restless son had stumbled upon something that would reveal truths long buried. The box contained more than simple old documents. It held the pieces of a puzzle that would begin to assemble in an unexpected way. The recordings, the altered contracts, the archived messages, everything pointed to a story very different from what Hannah knew about her past. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a luxurious office, Richard leafed through the magazine. With Hannah's profile, his eyes fixed on the photo of her with the 4 boys. Beside him, Marcus, his partner, observed his reaction with a mixture of concern and guilt. The empire they had built was beginning to show its first cracks, and the secrets kept for so long threatened to come to light. Luke's accidental discovery triggered a series of events that no one could have predicted. Beatrice, the journalist who had become close to the family, began to notice strange patterns as she researched more deeply for a series of reports on social entrepreneurship. The dates on the found documents didn't match the official records, and the recordings contained conversations that suggested an elaborate conspiracy. Hannah, initially reluctant to revisit the past, couldn't ignore the evidence that was accumulating. One night, after putting the boys to bed, she decided to listen to one of the recordings. Marcus's voice, Richard's former partner, echoed clearly through the speaker. "She's too smart, she'll figure out what we're doing. We need to act now." The quadruplets, even while sleeping, seemed to sense the tension that was growing. Gabriel, the most sensitive, began to have frequent nightmares. Michael, always observant, spent more time in silence, his attentive eyes following every movement of his mother. Luke continued his explorations, now with a more defined purpose, while Ryan intensified his protective instincts. Mrs. Clara, with her serene wisdom, noticed the change in the environment. One afternoon, while the children played in the garden, she approached Hannah. "Sometimes, my child, the truth needs time to mature, like a fruit that cannot be picked before its time." Prevent Life continued to grow, now with projects in various communities. Hannah immersed herself in work with even more intensity, as if seeking answers in each new scientific advance. Her innovative method of preventive diagnosis was revolutionizing access to healthcare in vulnerable areas, but her mind frequently returned to the found documents. Beatrice, driven by her journalistic instinct, began to connect the dots. The messages on the flash drives revealed a meticulous plan to distance Hannah from the company. Marcus, fearing she would discover irregularities in the accounts and, especially, that her talent would overshadow the established leadership, had orchestrated each step of her removal. "The numbers don't lie," explained Beatrice, showing her notes to Hannah. "The dates of the bank transfers, the alterations in the contracts, everything was planned to make it appear that you had agreed to leave." The journalist had discovered a pattern of manipulation that extended beyond that rainy night at the Crystal Hall. The Quadruplets, even in their childish innocence, perceived that something important was happening. One day during breakfast, Michael surprised everyone with a question. "Mom, why is the man in the big photo sad?" He pointed to the open magazine. On the table, where a recent photo showed Richard at a business event, his face marked by an expression of deep melancholy. Hannah didn't have time to respond. Luke, always impetuous, was already leafing through the magazine, his eyes shining with curiosity. "He looks like Ryan when he's worried about us," he exclaimed, provoking a thoughtful silence at the table. Luke's innocent comment hit Hannah like lightning. It was true. There was something familiar in Ryan's protective gestures, something she recognized from a past that seemed increasingly nebulous. The similarities between father and sons, which she had tried to ignore for so long, were beginning to become impossible to deny. Meanwhile, in Richard's company office, a crisis was unfolding. Marcus, now CEO, had begun implementing changes that threatened the company's stability. The same tactics he had used to push Hannah away years before were being employed against his former friend and partner. Richard, sitting in his office with a view of the city, held a copy of the article about Hannah and Prevent Life. His eyes scanned the photos of the Quadruplets, lingering on every detail of their faces. The weight of past choices, accepted lies, and ignored truths was becoming unbearable. It was at this moment that Beatrice, following a crucial lead, discovered something that would change everything. The recordings weren't just about Hannah. They revealed a much larger scheme where her removal was just one piece of a more complex puzzle. The true story was only beginning to reveal itself. Beatrice's discoveries began to create larger and larger waves in the corporate world. The journalist had gathered enough evidence to show how Marcus systematically manipulated information and people to maintain his control over the company. What began with Hannah's removal years ago now revealed itself as a pattern of behavior that affected various aspects of the business. On a particularly busy morning at Prevent Life, Hannah was receiving the results of her latest clinical tests when Gabriel, the most sensitive of the Quadruplets, had an anxiety attack at school. The teacher reported that the boy had become extremely agitated after an activity about family. "He kept asking about his father," explained the educator, concerned. The incident made Hannah realize she could no longer postpone certain conversations. That night, she gathered the 4 boys in the living room of the apartment they had managed to rent near the St. Clair Community Center. Michael, with his observant eyes, already seemed to anticipate the seriousness of the conversation. Luke couldn't sit still on the sofa, while Ryan tried to calm Gabriel, who was still sensitive. "Mommy is going to tell you a story," Hannah began, her voice soft but firm. "A story about love, choices, and new beginnings." As she spoke about the past, adapting the narrative so the children could understand, Hannah noticed how each of the boys processed the information in a unique way. Michael absorbed each word, in silence, his eyes revealing an understanding beyond his years. Luke constantly interrupted with questions, wanting to know more details about the Crystal Hall and the company. Gabriel moved closer to his mother, seeking physical contact as a form of comfort. Ryan, surprisingly, was the one who asked the most difficult question: "Can we meet our father?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Hannah was about to respond when her phone rang. It was Beatrice with urgent news. "Hannah, you need to see this. I found documents that prove Marcus is doing to Richard exactly what he did to you." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. The journalist had discovered that Marcus was gradually removing Richard from control of the company, using similar tactics to those he had employed years ago. Documents were altered, important meetings were rescheduled without notice, decisions were made without prior consultation. At the St. Clair Community Center, Mrs. Clara observed everything with maternal concern. "The children feel when something is different," she commented, noticing how the quadruplets were more agitated than normal. "Perhaps it's time to let the past reconcile with the present." Prevent Life continued to grow, now with a revolutionary preventive diagnosis project that was attracting international attention. Hannah divided her time between managing the company, caring for her children, and dealing with the revelations that emerged daily about her past. It was during an important presentation to investors that destiny decided to intervene. Hannah was explaining how her technology could transform access to healthcare in underprivileged communities when Richard entered the auditorium. He wasn't there as a businessman or ex-partner, but as a father who finally found the courage to face his past choices. The quadruplets, who were backstage with Mrs. Clara, instantly reacted to their father's presence, even without knowing who he was. Michael stopped his reading, his eyes fixed on the familiar figure. Luke, restless, as always, whispered something about having already seen that face in photos. Gabriel felt a wave of emotions he couldn't explain, while Ryan, unconsciously, took a step in front of his brothers. Hannah maintained her professional composure, finishing the presentation with the same eloquence as always. But her heart was racing, not just because of Richard's presence, but because of what his appearance meant. The truths that Beatrice had discovered were about to come to light in a way no one could have predicted. Backstage, Mrs. Clara held Gabriel's hand, which trembled slightly. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the universe chooses its own moments to fix what is broken." Meanwhile, Luke had already escaped supervision and was approaching Richard, his curiosity stronger than any social protocol. The unexpected meeting in the auditorium triggered a series of events that no one could have predicted. Luke, with his characteristic curiosity, was the first to break the ice, approaching Richard with a direct question. "Why do you look sad in the magazine photos?" The simplicity of the childish question caught Richard off guard. His eyes, which until then had been fixed on Hannah, turned to the small boy in front of him. The resemblance was undeniable, the same restless look he himself had in childhood, the same way of tilting his head when curious. Hannah, recovering from the initial surprise, realized she could no longer postpone the inevitable. With a gentle gesture, she called the other boys, who approached at different rhythms. Michael with calculated steps, Gabriel half hidden behind Ryan, who maintained his protective posture. "Children," Hannah began, her voice firmer than she felt. "This is Richard." She paused, searching for the right words. He is your father." The silence that followed was broken by Luke, who immediately fired a series of questions. Michael observed intensely, processing every detail of the situation. Gabriel, surprisingly, was the one who took a step forward, his sensitive eyes capturing something in Richard's expressions that the others hadn't yet noticed. Beatrice, who watched the scene from afar, realized she was witnessing more than a family reunion. It was the beginning of a reconciliation that could expose all of Marcus's manipulations. Discreetly, she began to make notes in her notebook. Mrs. Clara, with her characteristic wisdom, suggested that everyone gather at the community center. "Some conversations need a safe place to happen," she said, guiding the group out of the auditorium. In the welcoming environment of the community center, the children began to loosen up more. Luke showed Richard his improvised scientific experiments, clearly inherited from his mother. Michael, still silent, didn't take his eyes off his father, as if assembling a mental puzzle. Gabriel gradually began to approach, attracted by the gentleness he perceived in Richard's gestures. Ryan, although maintaining his protective posture, demonstrated a growing curiosity. It was during this interaction that Richard finally found the courage to begin explaining. He didn't try to justify himself, but shared how Marcus had manipulated information, created mistrust, and gradually poisoned relationships within the company. "I was weak," he admitted, his voice laden with regret. "I let Marcus's lies blind." "Me? And when I finally realized the truth, I thought it was too late to fix things." Hannah listened with a mixture of emotions. Years of hurt couldn't be erased in a day, but there was something in the interaction between Richard and the children that touched her heart. Each gesture, each look exchanged between father and sons, revealed connections that not even time and distance had managed to break. Meanwhile, at the company, Marcus was beginning to realize that his plan was crumbling. Beatrice's investigations had reached the ears of the administrative board, and important documents were beginning to reveal inconsistencies in his actions over the years. At the community center, the hours passed almost unnoticed. Richard learned about each of the boys: Michael's silent intelligence, Luke's infinite curiosity, Gabriel's unique sensitivity, Ryan's protective strength. Each discovery was like a precious gift, a chance to get to know the sons who had grown up without his presence. Mrs. Clara, observing everything with her wise eyes, prepared tea for everyone. "You know," she said to Richard when the others were distracted, "a father isn't made just of DNA. It's made of presence, of daily choices, of love demonstrated in small gestures." Night came, and with it the need to establish new boundaries and expectations. Hannah, always pragmatic, suggested they start slowly. "The children need time to process all this," she explained, "and so do we." Richard agreed, understanding there was much to rebuild. Before leaving, he took a card with his phone number from his pocket. "For when they want to talk," he said simply, handing it to Hannah. It was at this moment that Luke, always impulsive, ran to give his father a hug, breaking any formality that still remained in the environment. The days that followed the reunion brought subtle but significant changes to the family's routine. Richard began to participate in the boys' lives in a gradual and respectful way. It started with short visits to the park, then Sunday lunches, always following the pace that Hannah and the children established. Each of the quadruplets reacted differently to their father's presence. Michael, the observer, began to ask deeper questions about the past, wanting to understand every detail of the family history. Luke transformed Richard into his new partner for scientific experiments, constantly asking for help with increasingly elaborate projects. Gabriel, initially hesitant, found in his father an unexpected source of understanding for his sensitivity. Ryan, although still protective, began to relax his guard when he saw how his brothers flourished with the new presence. At Prevent Life, Hannah continued revolutionizing the field of preventive health. Her most recent project, a mobile diagnostic system that could be easily implemented in remote areas, was about to receive important international funding. Richard's presence in her professional life also began to manifest in unexpected ways. He started offering valuable insights on business management, always respecting the boundaries established by Hannah. Beatrice, immersed in her investigation, discovered more evidence of Marcus's manipulations. Documents revealed a pattern of behavior that extended over years, affecting not only Hannah and Richard, but various other employees and partners of the company. The journalist, however, perceived that there was something bigger at stake, a story of redemption and reconstruction that transcended the corporate environment. It was during an afternoon at the community center that an unexpected situation changed the family dynamic. Gabriel, always the most sensitive of the quadruplets, began to show worrying symptoms. His headaches, previously occasional, became more frequent and intense. Hannah, with her knowledge in biotechnology, suspected it wasn't something simple. The preliminary exams confirmed her concerns. Gabriel had a rare condition that required specialized attention. The diagnosis fell like a bomb on the newly reconnected family. Hannah, accustomed to facing challenges alone, found herself facing a situation where she would need to trust other people. Richard, upon learning of the situation, didn't hesitate. He mobilized his contacts to get the best specialists, but did everything discreetly and always consulting Hannah before any decision. His genuine concern for Gabriel revealed a side of him that until then had remained hidden, that of a father who, even having been absent, carried a deep love for his children. The other boys reacted each in their own way. Michael began to read everything he could about his brother's condition, becoming a small walking medical encyclopedia. Luke redirected his energy to inventing devices that could help Gabriel feel more comfortable. Ryan intensified his care, developing an even greater sensitivity to anticipate his brother's needs. Mrs. Clara, observing everything with her characteristic wisdom, noticed how the situation was uniting the family in a way that no planning could have achieved. "Sometimes," she said to Hannah during one of their nighttime conversations, "the universe presents us with challenges not to knock us down, but to show us the strength we have when we are united." Gabriel's condition required complex treatment, and it was during the medical consultations that Hannah and Richard began to rebuild a foundation of trust. It was no longer the romantic relationship of the past, but a partnership focused on the well-being of their children. The long hours in waiting rooms provided honest conversations about the past, the present, and the possibilities of the future. In one of these conversations, Richard finally opened his heart completely. He told how Marcus's manipulations had made him doubt everything, including his own judgment, how the fear of losing the company he had built had made him make decisions he would regret for the rest of his life, and how now, seeing his children grow, he realized he had wasted the most precious years because of lies and manipulations. The news of Gabriel's condition provoked a profound change in the family dynamic. Hannah, who always maintained a professional distance from Richard, began to realize they would need to work together in a way they had never imagined. The treatment required joint decisions, constant presence, and above all, a union that transcended past hurts. At Prevent Life, the new mobile diagnostic project gained an even more personal dimension. Hannah began to incorporate her experiences with Gabriel's condition into the development of the technology, seeking ways to make complex exams more accessible for families in similar situations. Her team, inspired by her dedication, worked tirelessly to perfect the system. The other quadruplets demonstrated surprising maturity in the face of the situation. Michael, always observant, began to document in a diary all of Gabriel's reactions to different treatments, creating a detailed record that would prove valuable for the doctors. Luke channeled his energy into creating small devices that helped his brother in daily life, from book stands to a lighting system that didn't aggravate his headaches. Ryan, in turn, developed an even deeper connection with Gabriel. It was as if he could feel when a crisis was approaching, alerting the parents before even the first symptoms appeared. His calm and constant presence became a fundamental pillar in his brother's well-being. Richard, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past, completely reorganized his professional life. He delegated responsibilities in the company, prioritizing time with his children. His visits to the St. Clair Community Center became more frequent, and he began to get involved in the social projects that meant so much to Hannah. It was during one of these visits that Mrs. Clara, with her characteristic perspicacity, noticed something special. "You two," she said to Hannah and Richard, "are finally learning to dance together without stepping on each other's toes." It was true. A delicate synchrony had developed between them, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. Beatrice, following the development of the story, realized that she had in her hands not just an exposé about Marcus's manipulations, but a powerful narrative about regeneration and second chances. In her notes, the journalist began to draw parallels between the transformation of the family and the changes occurring in the business scenario. Gabriel's treatment progressed slowly, with ups and downs that tested everyone's resilience. Each small victory was celebrated as a family, each setback faced with unity and determination. The nights at the hospital, which could have been moments of tension, transformed into opportunities for reconnection. On one of these nights, while Gabriel finally slept after a difficult day, Hannah found Richard in the hospital cafeteria. He was bent over company papers, but they weren't financial reports. They were projects to expand access to specialized treatments in underprivileged communities, inspired by Prevent Life's work. "You know," he said, lifting his eyes from the documents, "I spent years thinking that success meant numbers on a spreadsheet. Now I see that true success is being able to make a difference in people's lives." Hannah noticed that his eyes had the same sparkle she saw in Luke when he made a new discovery. Richard's transformation didn't go unnoticed by the community center staff. Anne, who once viewed him with suspicion, began to include him in the sewing, cooperatives projects, especially after he suggested ways to improve the distribution of products. Mary found in him an ally to expand the digital inclusion program, using his business contacts to get more equipment. The Quadruplets, observing the change in their father, began to open up in different ways. Michael shared his deepest thoughts during the chess matches that became a ritual between them. Luke couldn't contain himself from showing his latest inventions, especially when they were inspired by something Richard had mentioned. Ryan, although still protective, began to accept his father's help in caring for Gabriel. It was during a particularly significant afternoon that Hannah realized how much things had changed. Watching Richard help Gabriel with his physical therapy, exercises, while the other boys did their homework spread around the room, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the happy ending of a fairy tale. It was something more real, deeper, built on foundations of understanding, forgiveness, and mutual growth. As the family found its new rhythm, Beatrice advanced in her investigation into Marcus's activities. The journalist had discovered a disturbing pattern of financial manipulation that went far beyond Hannah and Richard's case. Documents revealed systematic alterations in contracts, misappropriation of funds from social projects, and a network of influences that extended across various sectors of the company. On a busy morning at Prevent Life, Hannah was receiving the most recent results of tests on her mobile diagnostic system when Beatrice arrived without warning. "We need to talk," said the journalist, her tense face reflecting the gravity of the situation. "I found something that will change everything." The discoveries were impressive. Marcus hadn't just manipulated situations to push Hannah away. He had systematically sabotaged various research and development projects that could benefit underprivileged communities. His obsession with control and profit had harmed countless initiatives that could have transformed lives. Richard, upon being informed of the discoveries, felt the weight of years of manipulation crumble upon his shoulders. "How could I have been so blind?" he questioned himself, mentally reviewing each decision he had made under Marcus's influence. The guilt was crushing, but Hannah, surprisingly, was the one who offered a different perspective. "The important thing isn't how long it takes us to see the truth," she said, her voice firm but gentle, "but what we do after we discover it." The Quadruplets, even without completely understanding the situation, sensed the tension in the air. Gabriel, especially sensitive to adults' emotions, began to show more anxiety. It was Luke who inadvertently provided a moment of relief by appearing with his newest invention, a device that changed color according to the ambient temperature. "That gave me an idea," said Hannah, observing Luke's improvised apparatus. Her mobile diagnostic project could be adapted to include an early warning system, similar to what Ryan had naturally developed in relation to Gabriel. The technology could learn to recognize subtle patterns that preceded crises or complications. Aunt Clara, always present at crucial moments, offered the community center as a base for a pilot project. "Here we have real people, with real needs," she argued. "What better place to test something that can help so many families?" The idea quickly took shape. The Prevent Life team began to work on an expanded version of the system, incorporating elements of artificial intelligence that could learn from each patient's patterns. Richard, using his business contacts, secured partnerships that would allow implementing the project on a large scale. It was during one of these development meetings that Michael, silently observing as always, asked a question that left everyone thoughtful. If Uncle Marcus doesn't like to help people, why does he work in a big company? The innocent question touched on a crucial point. Richard's company, originally founded with the objective of developing technologies that would benefit society, had deviated from its purpose under Marcus's influence. It was time for a redirection. Beatrice, preparing her report, began to see beyond the corporate scandal. There was a story of personal transformation and redemption that needed to be told. The journalist spent days interviewing former employees, business partners, and beneficiaries of the company's first social projects. The picture that formed was clear. Marcus had systematically destroyed not only relationships, but also the original purpose of the company. His manipulations had created a culture of mistrust and individualism that suffocated any social impact initiative. Ryan, always attentive to others, noticed the change in his father before anyone else. "Dad is different," he commented to Hannah one night. "He smiles more when talking about work now." It was true. Richard had found a new purpose, a chance to correct years of misguided decisions. The transformation wasn't limited to the adults. The quadruplets, each in their own way, began to understand the value of the work their parents did. Luke directed his curiosity towards projects with social impact. Michael developed a deep understanding of ethical issues. Gabriel found ways to use his sensitivity to help others, and Ryan further strengthened his caregiving instinct. Beatrice's report had a tremendous impact when it was finally published. The story wasn't just about Marcus's manipulations. It was a powerful portrait of how unbridled ambition could corrupt the noblest purposes, and how it was possible to recover the lost path through conscious and courageous choices. The company's administrative board reacted quickly to the revelations. A complete audit was initiated, and Marcus was removed from his functions. Richard, however, wasn't interested in simply resuming his old position. He had a different vision for the future. "I want to transform the company into something our children can be proud of," he explained to Hannah during one of the lunches they now regularly shared, "not just for financial success, but for the positive impact we can have on society." Prevent Life was becoming a model company with social purpose. The mobile diagnostic system, now perfected with years of data and experience, was revolutionizing care in underprivileged communities. Hannah had created a mentoring program for young scientists from vulnerable areas, inspired by her own journey. The quadruplets flourished amid all these changes. Luke had started a science club at the community center, where he taught other children to create inventions with recycled materials. Michael, always observant, began to write small stories about the people he met at the center, revealing a surprising talent for capturing people's essence. Gabriel, although still dealing with his condition, found in art a form of expression. His paintings, full of vibrant colors and abstract forms, began to decorate the walls of the community center, inspiring others to find beauty even in difficult moments. Ryan, in turn, developed a support program for children with conditions similar to his brother's. Mrs. Clara observed all these transformations with a serene smile. The community center, which had begun as a simple shelter, was transforming into a true hub of social innovation. Anne had expanded her sewing cooperative to include a line of clothes adapted for people with special needs. Mary was developing applications that made technology more accessible to underprivileged communities. It was during a special afternoon at the community center that Hannah realized how much their lives had changed. She observed Richard sitting on the floor, helping Luke assemble a new experiment, while Michael read one of his stories to a group of children. Gabriel painted peacefully in his favorite corner, with Ryan always nearby, ready to help if necessary. "You know what impresses me most," commented Beatrice, who had become a constant presence in the family's life. "How you transformed a story of betrayal and manipulation into something so positive." It was true. What could have been just another corporate scandal had transformed into a movement of real change. Richard's company was being restructured with a focus on social innovation, working in partnership with Prevent Life on various projects. "Sometimes," reflected Hannah, "we need to lose everything to find our true purpose." She observed her children, each unique and special in their own way, all contributing to making the world a better place. And sometimes what seems to be our greatest challenge becomes our greatest blessing. Gabriel's treatment was progressing well, and his condition had inspired a new line of research at Prevent Life focused on personalized preventive medicine. Richard, who before saw only numbers and results, now understood the real value of each project, of each life impacted. The nights at the community center became special moments of community. Families gathered to share stories, learn from each other, and plan new projects. The quadruplets were the heart of these meetings. Luke with his inventions, Michael with his stories, Gabriel with his art, and Ryan with his ability to bring people together. "You've created something extraordinary here," said Mrs. Clara one night, observing the courtyard full of life. Not just a family, but an entire community based on love, respect, and purpose. Hannah and Richard exchanged a look of understanding. It wasn't the ending they had imagined years ago, but it was infinitely more meaningful. They had found a purpose greater than themselves, and their children were growing in an environment where they could truly make a difference. The impact of Beatrice's report continued reverberating through the corporate world. Companies from all over the country began to re-examine their governance practices, and Prevent Life's business model, combining technological innovation with social impact, became a case study in important business schools. Hannah was invited to give a lecture at an international conference on healthcare innovation. At first, she hesitated. She had never imagined herself in the role of keynote speaker. It was Gabriel who surprisingly encouraged her. "Mum, other people need to know how to help the way you help." The quadruplets insisted on participating in the preparation of the presentation, each contributing in their own way. Michael helped organize the data in a clear and objective manner. Luke created small practical demonstrations to illustrate how the technology worked. Gabriel selected the colors and images that would make the presentation more welcoming. Ryan ensured that the main message, the importance of access to healthcare, remained at the center of everything. Richard, observing the children's involvement, realized it was time to make a significant change in his own company. "Let's create a youth council," he proposed during a family dinner, "a group of young people who can bring new perspectives to our social projects." The idea quickly took shape. The youth council began with a group of teenagers from the community center, including some who had been helped by Prevent Life's projects. Luke, although still young, was named honorary mascot of the group, his creative ideas always welcome at the meetings. Mrs. Clara, seeing the community center transform into a true laboratory of social innovation, decided to expand its impact even further. With Hannah and Richard's help, she initiated an exchange program with other community centers, sharing knowledge and resources. "It's like a big family expanding," she explained to Gabriel, who was helping her organize the flowers in the therapeutic garden they had created together. The boy, who before struggled with his sensitivity, now saw it as a gift that allowed him to connect deeply with people. Gabriel's condition, while still requiring constant care, had stabilized significantly. The treatment developed based on Ryan's observations had proven so effective that Prevent Life was adapting the protocol to help other children with similar conditions. Michael, always attentive to details, began to document all the success stories.
Hjärta från blindring fisk sekunder extra isli himli.
Easier to see the path. Luke, inspired by the success of his brother's blog, decided to create a series of educational videos about science and social technology. With Mary's help, he transformed complex concepts into fun and accessible explanations. His videos soon became popular among students and educators. Ryan, always focused on caring for others, developed a mentoring program where older teenagers helped children with special needs. "Everyone has something to teach," he would say, repeating one of Mrs. Clara's favorite phrases. On a particularly significant afternoon, Hannah found Richard in the garden of the community center, watching the boys play. "You know," he said, "I spent years thinking that success was something measured in numbers. Now I see that it's measured in smiles, in transformed lives, in realized dreams." Anne, who was passing by with a new batch of adapted uniforms, smiled upon hearing the comment. Her sewing cooperative had transformed into a thriving social enterprise, providing specialized clothing for hospitals and rehabilitation centers throughout the country. The transformation wasn't limited to professional aspects. Hannah and Richard had found a new type of partnership based on mutual respect and the shared desire to make a difference. It wasn't a renewed romance, but something equally valuable, a deep friendship and an effective partnership in raising their children and carrying out meaningful projects. The quadruplets, observing the harmony between their parents, developed their own understanding about relationships and purpose. It's like our experiments, Luke explained one day. Sometimes it needs several different elements to create something special. Hannah's lecture at the international conference was a resounding success. Her presentation, enriched by her children's contributions, touched hearts and minds. It wasn't just about technology and innovation, it was about how small actions could trigger great transformations. The video of the lecture went viral on social media, reaching millions of views. "Mom, you're famous!" exclaimed Luke, showing the enthusiastic comments that were coming from all parts of the world. Hannah, however, was more interested in the practical impact of her message. Invitations for partnerships and collaborations began to arrive from everywhere. International organizations wanted to implement the Prevent Life model in different cultural contexts. Universities requested case studies on the integration between technology and social impact. Richard, inspired by Hannah's success, decided to accelerate the changes in his own company. The Youth Council was given real decision-making power in social projects, and a specific fund was created to finance initiatives proposed by the community. The Quadruplets continued to surprise everyone with their development. Michael, with his blog of community center stories, had created a solidarity network that extended throughout the country. People shared their own experiences of overcoming, creating a web of mutual support. Luke transformed his science club into a structured program of scientific education for underprivileged children. With the support of Prevent Life and Richard's company, the program began to be replicated in other community centers. "Science is for everyone," he insisted, echoing his mother's teachings. Gabriel, although still dealing with his condition, had become an inspiration for other children with similar challenges. His therapeutic garden at the community center became a space of healing and renewal, where art and nature combined to create an environment of peace and recovery. Ryan, always attentive to the needs of others, expanded his mentoring program to include training in first aid and basic emotional support. "Sometimes we just need to know we're not alone," he explained, demonstrating wisdom beyond his years. Mrs. Clara, observing all these transformations, decided to document the history of the community center. With Beatrice's help, she began to gather testimonials, photos, and documents that told not just the story of Hannah and her family, but of all the lives that had been touched over the years. "Each person who passes through here leaves a mark," she said, showing Michael an old photo album, "and each mark tells a story of hope." The boy, fascinated by the historical records, began to incorporate these old stories into his blog, creating a bridge between past and present. Anne and her sewing cooperative received a special order to create uniforms for the first graduating class of Luke's scientific education program. The clothes, besides being practical, incorporated design elements suggested by Gabriel, becoming symbols of a truly inclusive education. Mary, inspired by the success of Luke's educational videos, developed a digital platform that allowed other communities to share their own educational content. "Knowledge is like light," she would say. "The more we share, the brighter it gets." On a special night at the community center, during a celebration that brought together beneficiaries, volunteers, and supporters, Hannah had an epiphany. Observing her children interacting with other children, each in their unique way, she realized they had created something much bigger than a biotechnology company or a community center. "We've created a movement," she said to Richard, who silently agreed. It was true. What had begun as a story of personal overcoming had transformed into a catalyst for social change. Each person touched by their initiatives became, in turn, an agent of transformation in their own community. The Quadruplets, although still young, already understood the value of their family legacy. It wasn't about wealth or power, but about the ability to make a difference in people's lives. "We're like seeds," Gabriel said one day, painting a mural at the community center, growing together to create something beautiful. The success of the integrated model between Prevent Life and the St. Clair Community Center began to attract international attention. an important global health organization, expressed interest in replicating the program in different countries. The proposal was tempting: abundant resources, worldwide exposure, and the chance to impact millions of lives. However, Hannah discovered that the organization had indirect connections with Marcus's former business circle. The decision that presented itself wasn't simple: accept the support and expand rapidly, or maintain the organic and independent growth they had been building. "Sometimes the longer path is the safer one," observed Michael during a family dinner, surprising everyone with his insight. Hannah smiled, recognizing in her son's words the same caution she herself felt. The Quadruplets, now more mature, actively participated in discussions about the future of the projects. Luke suggested that, instead of an immediate international expansion, they could create an exchange program with other community centers in the country. "We can learn from them too," he argued, "and then grow together." Gabriel, who had developed a special sensitivity for organizational issues, expressed concern about a too rapid expansion. "It's like when we plant flowers in the garden," he explained. "If we put too many at once, some can't grow properly." Ryan, always focused on the human aspect, suggested they begin by training community leaders from other regions. "That way, when we grow, we'll already have people who understand our way of working," he proposed, demonstrating a deep understanding of people management. Richard, who had learned the hard way about the dangers of hasty partnerships, supported Hannah's caution. Together, they developed an alternative plan. They would create an independent institute focused on education and training of community leaders in the area of preventive health. Mrs. Clara, with her characteristic wisdom, approved the decision. "You are planting trees whose fruits will feed generations," she said, observing the preparations for the new project. The community center would be the headquarters of the institute, keeping its roots firmly planted in the community that saw it born. The news of the refusal of the international partnership caused surprise in the market, but Hannah's explanation for the decision gained even more admirers. "True social impact isn't measured by the speed of expansion, but by the depth of transformation," she declared in an interview that would become a reference in the sector. The boys continued developing their own projects. Michael expanded his blog to include a podcast where young community leaders shared their experiences. Luke created a mobile laboratory that visited public schools, bringing scientific experiments to children who had never had contact with laboratory equipment. Gabriel, whose health condition was increasingly stable, began to offer art therapy workshops for other children with similar challenges. His therapeutic garden became a model studied by mental health professionals from all over the country. Ryan, inspired by the success of his mentoring program, developed an application that connected young volunteers to social projects in their communities. The tool, developed in partnership with Prevent Life's technology team, soon became a national success. Anne and her sewing cooperative received a special order to create the uniforms for the first class of the Institute. The design, developed in collaboration with Gabriel, incorporated elements that represented the union between technology and humanity, a perfect reflection of the project's philosophy. Mary expanded her digital inclusion program to include basic programming courses. "Technology is a tool for social transformation," she explained to students, "but it only works when we put people first." On a special afternoon, while observing a group of new instructors being trained to replicate the program in other communities, Hannah felt a wave of gratitude. The path they had chosen wasn't the fastest or the most lucrative, but it was authentic and true to the values they had built together. Richard, who was accompanying the training, shared his own reflection. "You know what impresses me most? How each decision we make thinking of the common good ends up bringing much greater results than we could imagine." The Quadruplets, observing their parents working together on the new project, developed their own understanding of leadership and social impact. It wasn't about power or recognition, but about the ability to create positive and lasting changes in people's lives. The Institute began its activities with a simple but significant ceremony at the St. Clair Community Center. The event brought together representatives from different communities, each bringing their own stories of overcoming and hope. Hannah, in her opening speech, surprised everyone by giving the floor to the Quadruplets. Michael, with his quiet eloquence, spoke about the importance of documenting and sharing stories of transformation. Luke enthusiastically engaged the audience with practical demonstrations of how science could solve everyday problems. Gabriel moved everyone by talking about how his own health journey had transformed into a project that helped other children. Ryan concluded by speaking about the strength of human connections and the importance of mutual care. The boys' presentation had a profound impact on those present. "They aren't just Hannah and Richard's children," commented Beatrice, who was covering the event. "They are the living example of how the next generations can unite purpose and action." The success of the Institute began to manifest in unexpected ways. Communities that received the training not only implemented the preventive health programs, but began to develop their own initiatives based on local needs. Anne expanded her cooperative to include a training program in social entrepreneurship, teaching other women to identify business opportunities with positive impact in their communities. "Each piece we produce carries a story of transformation," she explained to the new apprentices. Mary, inspired by the success of the technology program, developed an online platform that allowed different community centers to share their experiences and learnings. "Technology allows us to be local and global at the same time," she would say, echoing the teachings she had received from Hannah. Mrs. Clara, observing the growth of the project, decided to initiate a new program focused on the exchange of knowledge between different generations. "Each person who passes through here has something to teach and something to learn," she explained, as she organized meetings between elderly community members and young apprentices. The Quadruplets continued to surprise everyone with their development. Michael began working on a book that gathered the most impactful stories from his blog, showing how small actions could trigger big changes. Luke developed new prototypes to make medical exams less invasive, inspired by his brother's experience. Gabriel, whose sensitivity had transformed into a powerful healing tool, expanded his art therapy program to include music and dance. His therapeutic garden became a meeting space where people from different origins and stories could connect and heal together. Ryan, always attentive to the needs of others, began to train a new generation of mentors, sharing not only care techniques, but also the importance of empathy and genuine presence. "Each person is an entire world," he often said, "and deserves to be seen completely." Richard, observing the impact his children were making, realized that his own transformation was still not complete. He decided to create a business mentoring program focused on social impact businesses, sharing not only his management experience, but also the lessons he had learned about purpose and integrity. Hannah, dividing her time between Prevent Life, the Institute, and her family, found a balance she had never imagined possible. "It's not about doing everything perfectly," she explained in her lectures. "It's about doing what is meaningful and true." On a special night, during a celebration at the community center, Mrs. Clara gathered everyone for a moment of reflection. "Look," she said, her gaze scanning the familiar faces, "how a seed of hope planted in fertile soil can grow and multiply." The Quadruplets, sitting together as always, shared a look of understanding. Each of them had found their own way to contribute to the world, but together they formed something even more special, a living example of how differences could complement each other to create something extraordinary. "You know what makes me most proud?" said Hannah to Richard as they watched their children. "How they understood that success isn't about competing, but about collaborating." Richard nodded, understanding that this was perhaps the most valuable lesson they could have learned. The success of the Institute brought new challenges with it. The demand for training and partnerships grew exponentially, and Hannah found herself facing the need to expand the team without losing the essence of the work. It was then that Michael, during a family dinner, made a surprising suggestion. What if each person who graduated from the Institute committed to training 5 others, he proposed, explaining how this could create an exponential network of multipliers. The idea, seemingly simple, revealed a deep understanding of sustainable scalability. Luke, inspired by his brother's suggestion, began to develop a digital platform that would allow tracking and supporting this network of multipliers. "We can use artificial intelligence to identify patterns of success and areas that need more support, he explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Gabriel, who had become especially sensitive to people's emotional needs, suggested including a psychological support component in the program. It's not enough to just teach the technique, he argued. We need to take care of those who take care of others. Ryan, always focused on the practical aspect, developed a cascading mentorship system where each new community leader was accompanied by someone more experienced. It's like a big family expanding, he explained, where everyone supports each other. Richard, impressed with the maturity of his children's suggestions, decided to incorporate elements of the program into his own company. He created a specific department for social innovation, led by young talents trained at the Institute. Mrs. Clara, observing the changes with her wise gaze, began to organize regular meetings between the different groups of the program. It's important to keep the root strong while the branches expand, she would say, using her gardening metaphors that everyone had learned to appreciate. Prevent Life was also evolving. The mobile diagnostic system, now perfected with years of data and experience, was being adapted for different cultural and social contexts. Hannah insisted that each adaptation be done in close collaboration with local communities. Anne and her sewing cooperative received a special challenge: to create uniforms that could be easily reproduced by other cooperatives around the country. The project transformed into a training program in solidarity economy, uniting artisans from different regions. Mary expanded her digital inclusion program to include a component of developing technological solutions for local problems. Each community has its unique challenges, she explained, and often the best solution comes from those who live that reality. The Quadruplets, now known throughout the country for their work at the Institute, began to receive invitations to share their experiences in different forums. Michael spoke about the importance of documentation and memory in social projects. Luke shared his vision about how technology could be a tool for social transformation. Gabriel, overcoming his initial shyness, became an eloquent spokesperson about the importance of mental health in community projects. His lectures, always, held in his therapeutic garden, combined theory and practice in a unique way. Ryan developed a special program to identify and develop young leaders in vulnerable communities. Each person has a potential for change within them, he often said. Sometimes they just need an opportunity to discover it. On a particularly significant afternoon during a meeting of the Institute's board, Hannah realized something extraordinary. Her children were no longer just participants in the project. They had become true agents of transformation, each in their own unique way. Richard, who participated in the meeting, shared an important reflection. Perhaps the greatest success of the Institute isn't just the number of people we help, but how we've managed to create a model that adapts and grows in an organic and sustainable way. Beatrice, who continued documenting the evolution of the project, noticed how each new challenge seemed to bring with it its own solution. It's as if the Institute had developed a collective intelligence, she observed, where each person contributes their unique perspective for the common good. The expansion of the Institute began to attract international attention again, but this time it was different. Instead of large organizations wanting to impose their model, it was communities from different countries asking to learn and adapt the program to their realities. The impact of the Institute began to manifest in increasingly surprising ways. Communities that had participated in the first training sessions were developing their own innovative initiatives, adapting and expanding the knowledge received in unique and creative ways. Michael, through his documentation work, identified an interesting pattern. Each community that received the training developed its own specialty based on its characteristics and local needs. It's like a garden where each plant grows in its own way, he observed, using a metaphor that would have made Mrs. Clara smile. Luke, always attentive to technological possibilities, developed a system that allowed these different initiatives to connect and share experiences. It's not just about sharing successes, he explained, but also about learning from each other's challenges. Gabriel, whose sensitivity had become a powerful tool for transformation, began working on a project that united art therapy and technology. Using virtual reality resources, he created therapeutic environments that could be accessed by people in different places. Ryan expanded his mentoring program to include an international component, connecting young leaders from different countries. Cultural differences enrich us, he said, and human challenges are universal. Hannah observed her children's development with a mixture of pride and admiration. Each of them had found their own way to contribute to the family project, maintaining their individualities while working toward a common goal. Richard, who had learned to value social impact as much as financial success, began to implement significant changes in his company. He created a social investment program that supported initiatives born in the communities served by the Institute. Mrs. Clara, although older, continued to be a vital force in the project. Her wisdom was now shared not only personally, but through an intergenerational mentoring program she had developed. Each generation has something to teach and something to learn, she often said. Anne transformed her sewing cooperative into a solidarity economy network that extended throughout the country. What began with uniforms for the Institute now included a complete line of sustainable products, all produced by women in vulnerable situations. Mary, inspired by the success of the digital inclusion program, developed a distance education platform that allowed the Institute's knowledge to reach increasingly remote places. Technology can bring hearts closer, she would say, when used with purpose. The Quadruplets, now teenagers, began to develop their own individual projects, always maintaining the connection with the Institute's work. Michael initiated a program of historical documentation in traditional communities. Luke focused on the development of accessible social technologies. Gabriel expanded his work with art therapy to include emotional development programs. Ryan began to form a new generation of community mentors. On a special afternoon, during a celebration that brought together representatives from different communities served by the Institute, Hannah had an important revelation. Observing people sharing their stories, achievements, and dreams, she realized they had created something much bigger than a social project. They had created a transformation movement that fed itself and expanded organically. Richard, who was at her side, shared a similar reflection. It's amazing how something that began with a decision to start over has transformed into so many stories of new beginnings for other people. Beatrice, who continued documenting the evolution of the project, noticed how each new development seemed to naturally arise from the needs and potentialities of the communities themselves. It's as if the Institute had created an ecosystem of social innovation, she observed. The strength of the work was precisely in its ability to adapt and grow organically, respecting the characteristics and needs of each location where it established itself. It wasn't a rigid model that needed to be followed to the letter, but a set of principles and values that could be adapted and reinterpreted. The Quadruplets, in their young but deep wisdom, had instinctively understood this. Each of them contributed in their unique way, but always keeping focus on the greater goal of social transformation. It's like an orchestra, Gabriel explained one day, where each instrument has its own sound, but together we create a much more beautiful music. Time had transformed the St. Clair Community Center into much more than a simple community space. Now it was a vibrant complex that included the Institute, Prevent Life laboratories, social co-working spaces, and Gabriel's ever-growing therapeutic garden. The place that once welcomed Hannah in her most vulnerable moment had become a beacon of hope and social innovation. The big news was the inauguration of a new wing of the Institute, dedicated especially to the formation of young leaders. The Eat is a project, conceived jointly by the Quadruplets, represented a natural evolution of all the work developed until then. Michael had created a center of memory and documentation where transformation stories were preserved and shared. Each story here is a seed of hope for someone, he explained, guiding visitors through a multimedia exhibition that blended technology and emotion. Luke transformed part of the space into a social innovation laboratory, where young people from different communities could develop technological solutions for local challenges. The best technology is the one that is born from people's real needs, he often told new participants. Gabriel's therapeutic garden had expanded to include different sensory environments, each designed to meet specific needs for healing and emotional development. Each person has their own rhythm of healing, he explained, and each space here respects that. Ryan coordinated a mentoring program that had already trained hundreds of young community leaders. True power lies in empowering others to discover their own strength, he shared with his apprentices, echoing the lessons he had learned over the years. Hannah, observing her children's work, felt a deep gratitude for the path traveled. Prevent Life had become a world reference in social technology, but it was in the direct impact on people's lives that she found her greatest fulfillment. Richard, who had completely transformed his vision of business success, now devoted much of his time to mentoring young social entrepreneurs. The real profit is in the transformation we generate, he often said in his lectures. Mrs. Clara, although older, continued to be the spiritual heart of the project. Her intergenerational mentoring program had become a model studied internationally. Knowledge is like water, she would say. It needs to flow freely between generations to stay alive. Anne and her cooperative had transformed into a national network of solidarity economy, connecting artisans from across the country. What began with uniforms now included a complete line of sustainable products, each telling a story of transformation. Mary had expanded her digital inclusion program to create a continuing education platform that served thousands of people. Technology is just a bridge, she explained. What matters is the human connection we create through it. Beatrice, who continued documenting the evolution of the project, was preparing to launch a book that told not just the story of the Institute, but of the hundreds of lives transformed through it. Each chapter is a testimony that it is always possible to begin again, she commented during a preview of the launch. On a special afternoon, while watching a new class of young leaders presenting their projects, Hannah felt a different emotion. It wasn't just pride in what they had built, but a deep certainty that the work would continue far beyond them. The Quadruplets, each in their own way, had not only found their own paths, but were opening new paths for others. Michael with his preservation of memories, Luke with his humanized technology, Gabriel with his sensitive approach to healing, and Ryan with his ability to form new leaders. "You know what moves me most?" said Hannah to Richard during the project presentations. "Seeing how each seed we planted continues to generate new fruits." He nodded, perfectly understanding the meaning of those words. The St. Clair Community Center, which had once been a safe harbor for a pregnant and frightened woman, was now a beacon of hope that illuminated paths for thousands of people. Each story of overcoming that pass through there carried a bit of the strength that was born on that rainy night so many years ago. The celebration of the Institute's 15 years coincided with a special moment for the whole family. The St. Clair Community Center was filled with people who had been part of this extraordinary journey. Representatives from communities across the country gathered to share their transformation stories and renew their commitments to the future. The event began in Gabriel's therapeutic garden, which had become a true park of healing and connection. Among the carefully cultivated flowers and medicinal plants, stories of overcoming were shared like seeds of hope for the future. Michael, with his sensitivity for documenting significant moments, had prepared a special exhibition. On the walls of the Cultural Center, photos and videos told the story not just of the family, but of all the lives that had been touched by the project over the years. Luke surprised everyone with a demonstration of his newest creation, an augmented reality system that allowed people from different communities to connect and share experiences as if they were in the same space. Technology should bring people closer, not separate them, he explained. Gabriel, completely overcoming his former shyness, conducted a special session of collective art therapy. The garden filled with colors and music as people from different backgrounds and stories connected through artistic expression. Ryan gathered his mentees from different generations, creating an emotional moment of exchange of experiences. "Each person here is part of a chain of transformation," he said, his voice laden with emotion. Hannah, observing all this, felt a deep fulfillment. The small seed of hope she had planted in her most difficult moment had transformed into a leafy tree, whose fruits fed dreams and transformations in places she had never imagined reaching. Richard, who had learned to measure success not in numbers, but in transformed lives, shared an important announcement. His company was transforming into a corporation entirely dedicated to social impact, with profits being reinvested in community projects. Mrs. Clara, although physically more fragile, radiated a special energy that day. "Look," she said, her gaze sweeping across the space full of life, "how an act of love can multiply infinitely." Anne presented her newest initiative, a school of solidarity economy that would form new leaders in social entrepreneurship. Mary, in turn, announced the expansion of her digital inclusion program to rural communities. The Quadruplets, now young adults, had become living symbols of how different talents could complement each other toward a greater goal. Each of them led their own area of activity, but they remained united by the common purpose of social transformation. Beatrice, who had documented each step of this journey, observed how the story had transformed into something much bigger than a simple tale of overcoming. It was a living testimony of how love, perseverance, and purpose could create waves of transformation that expanded infinitely. At the end of the celebration, Hannah gathered everyone in the garden for a special moment of reflection. "Each person here carries a story of new beginnings," she said, "and each new beginning is an opportunity to create something new and better." The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with colors that seemed to celebrate the moment. Gabriel's garden, illuminated by small lights, created a magical atmosphere that invited contemplation and gratitude. It was at this moment that Michael shared his newest discovery. "You know what I realized documenting all these stories? That there is no end, only new beginnings. Each story that ends is a seed for another to begin." The St. Clair Community Center, which had once been just a shelter for a pregnant and frightened woman, was now a beacon of hope that illuminated paths across the country. Mrs. Clara's words, spoken so many years ago, had proven prophetic. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true purpose. And so, as night gently fell over the illuminated garden, stories continued to be shared, dreams continued to be dreamed, and new paths continued to be opened.